Thank you all for coming indoors on such a beautiful night to Zoom with us. My name is Emily Stone, and I'm the Naturalist and Education Director at the Cable Natural History Museum. And before we get started with the Wolf Talk, I just want to remind you that tomorrow evening we have another Zoom presentation at 7 p.m. on a sort of a happier topic. Dr. Julie Ray down in Winter has founded the Project Northwoods Nature Center, and she just really does incredible work. She's given dinner lectures for us before about snakes and her research in the tropics with snake roadkill and what she was able to find out. So just a really neat project happening. So if you need a little good news about what's happening with Northwoods Nature, join us again tomorrow. There'll be a different link, so you do need to RSVP for that lecture separately. But for tonight, I'm sort of happy to bring you Adrian Wydevan. He is, he's been a wolf expert in Wisconsin for many, many years, and currently is with the Timber Wolf Alliance, and of course is our neighbor here in the Cable area. So you probably are here because you've seen the headlines that a new quota was set for this year's wolf hunt. And that's on the heels of a pretty big hunt last spring as well. So Adrian is here to kind of tell us how that happened and give us some perspective on what it means. So go ahead and keep your video off and your audio muted, type your questions into the chat when you have them, and Adrian's gonna give us a little history, not even sharing his screen or anything, and then we'll open it up to questions. So thanks, Adrian. You can go ahead.
Okay. Welcome everyone, and thank you for attending the webinar, the Zoom meeting or Zoom get together. So tonight, normally I give wolf talks. I like to show a lot of nice wolf slides and a lot of graphics. Sarah always tells me too much graphics, but tonight I'm just going to talk to you. I'm going to go through the general history of how the wolf quota was established for this next fall hunt, the process for developing that quota, and just exactly what it means and what the likeliness of whether this quota is going to be completed or if that will change in the future. So and then open it up for people to ask questions. So on June 22nd of this year, the department held its wolf harvest quota meeting. I attended that. Actually, I attended on behalf of Wisconsin Green Fire. Eric Olson is the representative for Timberwolf Alliance, but this was a meeting for stakeholders to inform the department and to advise the department on the quota. And the meeting was mostly run by Randy Johnson, who's a large carnivore specialist for the Department of Natural Resources. Initially, Ben Beardmore talked about a public attitude survey that the department had done, and I think many of you probably filled out those questionnaires online, and that over 18,000 people responded to that. What Beardmore indicated is that such surveys are not of quantitative value, but gives the department a sense of some of the issues and concerns that are out there. And Brian Dewey from the research department gave a presentation on questionnaire that was sent to all the wolf hunters and trappers from last winter. That was 1,200 some people filled out those surveys, and of those, 60% said they were involved in pursuing wolves. And probably the most important discussion was by Jen Price Tack, who's another person with the research department, who gave the latest wolf population estimation at this meeting. And this is the population for February 2021. So it was surveys done between December and February 2021. Before the wolf hunt began, and there was an estimated population of 1,136 wolves by a modeling system called Occupancy Modeling, which is a new system the DNR is using for estimating wolf numbers, and that differs a little bit from a minimum counting system that the department has used in the past, which tends to be more conservative. The occupancy modeling on the average gives a number that's about 14.5% higher than a minimum count, but it has a broad confidence interval. And for this last winter, the confidence interval was from 944 to 1377 is a 95% confidence interval. This was the first year the department did not use any kind of minimum counts. In 2018, 2019, 2020, the department used both minimum counts and occupancy modeling. And then with the occupancy modeling, discussions are made of what the impact were of the last winter wolf hunt, and discussions whether the 218 that were known harvested, subtracting that from the population, was adequate for the post-harvest population. And many of the groups involved thought it was. Some groups thought it should be less than that because some of the yearling or some of the loners in the population would not have been adequately captured by the population estimation system. But the department did go with 218 as a number removed. Some of us thought it actually should have been quite a bit higher because we think with the speed at which that winter harvest occurred, it likely was the kill was probably considerably higher than those animals registered. But so the department made its quota estimations off of the population minus 218. So I'm assuming that was a number of 918 or so, although that number was not fully expressed. And based on that number and using a certain modeling system known as the Adams et al. 2008 that was developed some years ago, the estimations were that about 130 wolves would allow that population to remain relatively stable. One of the concerns we had with that number is that while the department recognized and accepted that the harvest was done in the middle of the breeding season, likely reduced levels of reproduction occurring this spring, the model didn't really take that into consideration, and the 130 would have been the kind of harvest you could have of a population of 900 wolves if you're to maintain stability if there was normal reproduction occurring. But there's a couple of other caveats with that, is that in previous developments of population models and estimated carrying capacity and estimations of quotas, the department used this more conservative minimum counting system. And as I said, that's about 14.5% lower than the occupancy modeling. So that would have been a population of 700 some wolves. So unfortunately, the department didn't look at it from that perspective. So based on this meeting, the department then came up with their final recommendation, and 130 ended up being their recommendations based on that modeling effort and the input they had gotten at this meeting. And so that was the number that the department prepared to go to the Natural Resource Board. The Natural Resource Board is the policy setting board for the DNR. It approves policies and regulations and rules that are done through the DNR. And it's a 7-member committee. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute here. But so in preparation for the Natural Resource Board meeting, the department is required to come to do this exercise called creating a green sheet. The green sheet is the background material that goes into development of certain policies. So there was a green sheet developed for establishing a fall wolf harvest of 130 wolves. So this green sheet was published on July 26, 2021, in preparation for the August 11th Natural Resource Board meeting. And the green sheet recommended this harvest of 130 wolves. One of the things the green sheet also did is that in the past, many groups have insisted we manage the wolf population down to 350, whereas the department's position had been that they're going to try to maintain the existing population. And the green sheet pointed out that the 350 was not a goal intended to hold a population to that level, but was a threshold level that was intended to allow certain management activities to occur. The department in the green sheet talks about using a precautionary approach, but the green sheet does not clearly identify the population the department was trying to stabilize, nor does it include the estimate of the population that was reported in the June meeting. The green sheet does indicate that 918 were subtracted from the wolf population, or 218, the harvest was subtracted from the wolf population, which was reported as 1,136 in the previous meeting. And another 42 wolves were subtracted from that of wolves that were living mostly on reservations. And that number was then used to determine the quota and a level that would maintain the population at that level. And 130 then was identified as a number that kind of the midpoint of the range of numbers that would keep the population at that 800 some wolf level. One of the problems with that, or one of the concerns with that, is that 130 is the middle point of a range that runs from 0 to 260. So that means potentially as few as 0 wolves would keep the population at that level, or potentially as many as 260. And at 130 level, it sort of implies that there's normal reproduction occurring in that population. And we're very concerned, and we believe it's likely that with the removal of pregnant females, removal of breeding males this winter, likely the level of reproduction was drastically reduced this spring. And some of the house surveys we're already starting to do, we're finding a lot fewer packs, fewer pups on the landscape. So as I had said in previous quota setting exercise, the department used a minimum count. And if you estimate a minimum count from this population, you're talking about 700 some wolves. And if that population goes through a normal cycle of pups born in the spring, but a reduced level of pups born in the spring, and those pups, some of them dying throughout the year, some adults and yearlings dying throughout the year, by next winter, you'd be looking at a population of about 650, 700 wolves without a hunt. And so if you add additional wolves on there, 130 wolves, it would reduce it to probably around 500 some wolves. And if it was as high as 300, as the Natural Resource Board ends up selecting, we could be talking about less than 400 wolves by next winter. So that green sheet then takes us to the Natural Resource Board meeting, which was held on August 11th. And so the Natural Resource Board is the policy setting body for the Department of Natural Resources. It's a citizen board that are selected by the governor on staggering terms, so that as you go through different governors, there's a mixture of selected people from different governors. And Tony Evers had selected 2 new members for the board for this spring. One of them did serve on the board on this meeting, but a second did not. Sandy Noss from Ashland, who was unable to sit in that seat because a previous member of the board, Dr. Frederick Pren, had not stepped down from his position in May. And he argued because the state Senate had not confirmed Sandy Noss that he could continue to fill that position. And that is part of the requirement of Natural Resource Board members. While they're selected by the governor, they're confirmed by the Senate, and the Senate has not gone around to confirming Sandy Noss, so giving Frederick Pren the opportunity to continue to serve on that board. So the other members of the board included Sharon Adams from Milwaukee area, who's a new member of the board, Terry Hilgenberg from Shawano area, Bill Bruins from southeast Wisconsin, Bill Smith from the Spooner area, who was formerly with the DNR administrator for the northwest part of the state, Marcy West from the Kickapoo area from southwestern Wisconsin, and Greg Kierzmerski from southeastern Wisconsin. The Secretary Preston Cole was involved in the meeting, as was Assistant Secretary Todd Ames. Most of the department's perspectives were presented by Keith Warnicke, who was the head of the lands programs for the DNR, or the wildlife management, parks, other programs such as that. And there were 55 people scheduled to talk. My notes, I captured about 45 people, and the majority of the people recommended 0 quotas or no harvest this fall. As you may recall, the department does not have an authority to not hold a wolf hunting season if they are on the federal, and if they're no longer on the federal endangered and threatened species list, and if they're not on the state federal endangered species list. The current law requires that the department shall hold a wolf hunting and trapping season. And so the department really has no choice but to hold some kind of a wolf hunting or trapping season. I represented Wisconsin Green Fire at this meeting, and Wisconsin Green Fire had recommended a quota of 30 wolves. There was another group that had also recommended at 31 wolves, but Wisconsin Wildlife Federation recommended 300. Wisconsin Bear Hunter Association recommended 420. Hunter Nation recommended 420. Wisconsin Conservation Congress recommended 400. And in the end, the Natural Resource Board ended up voting on 300 as their recommended quota. That was a vote of 4-3, but there was some confusion over that vote. And then right after the vote on the quota, there was a vote on a procedural question on whether or not the quota, any changes in the quota would have to be returned to Department of Natural Resources or to the Natural Resource Board if the Department of Natural Resources made any changes in that quota after the meeting. And that vote was 5-2 that the department would have to bring any changed quota back to the Natural Resource Board. So some media outlets are reporting it that 5-2 voted for a quota of 300, but board member Adams has come up with a news release saying that she did not intend to vote for 300. I think she voted against 300, but she did vote for the procedural part of that vote. So there was kind of some confusion there, and one of the board members was not sure exactly what she was voting for. It's likely that if Sandy Nass had been on the Natural Resource Board, the vote might have gone in a different direction. But in any case, so this is a current quota that the DNR is working on, or is considering for this next fall, a harvest of 300 wolves from the wolf population. Now, some of the other additional steps is the tribes do have the right to make a declaration on part of that quota, and about 42% of wolf range is in tribal, in the ceded territories of the Chippewa tribe. So potentially the tribes can request 126 wolves with the intent that they're not going to harvest those wolves and remove those from the quota, which would leave 174 wolves for the department, for state hunters and trappers. Whether there's going to be additional reductions of that number because of the overkill this last winter, 99 more wolves were killed than the quota that was intended this winter. If that were to be used, there's some possibility that might be considered. But in any case, 174 potentially could be the quota, but currently it still stands at 300. There may be additional pressures put on Dr. Prent to step down from the board and allow Sandy Nass to take over. I know that there's been urging by some groups for the state attorney general to file actions to remove Dr. Prent from this position. I'm not sure whether that will succeed or what the possibilities there are there. But there's some possibility that Dr. Prent might at some point have to leave the board. There will be an additional Natural Resource Board meeting next month, which will look at a few other issues that still will affect wolves, and that includes no longer allowing night hunting for wolves, a shorter period for closing the season. 24 hours were allowed this last winter. And also discussion of zone-specific permits. Right now, if you get a wolf permit, you can use it anywhere across the state as long as the zone is open. And some additional, I guess, just making DNR administrative rules compatible with the statutes, which I guess there is some discrepancy between those. So those are still going to be discussed by the Natural Resource Board next month. So some of the other possibilities of things that may happen, I know there's been efforts by some to promote pushing wolves back, encouraging wolves to go back on the endangered species list, or petitioning the Biden administration to put them back on endangered species list. If that were to succeed, it's probably not likely to occur before this next wolf hunting season. I've also seen requests to, instead of putting wolves back on endangered species list, is just downlisting wolves in the Great Lakes region instead of delisted, where they still would remain a threatened species, and that still would allow government trappers to euthanize problem wolves, but would not allow the possibility of a hunting season. I don't know whether there's a possibility of that occurring. And I've also seen some requests or recommendations of closing federal lands to wolf hunting and trapping. In fact, there was a letter written, an op-ed by Dan Ash, who was the former director of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in the Obama administration. And Dan had been instrumental in helping wolves become delisted in Montana and Idaho back in 2011, but has since begun to regret that. And in his op-ed, he recommended that those areas be relisted on the endangered species list. And if not relisted, he also recommended that all federal lands be closed to wolf hunting and trapping or wolf control efforts in those states. Many of you might know that Montana and Idaho are starting to implement some very aggressive controls on their wolf populations, intending to reduce their wolf populations down to by 85–90% of where the current populations are. And Dan Ash was recommending in his op-ed for closing federal lands to wolf hunting and trapping because of the aggressiveness of those actions. I don't know if that's a possibility. I know the Forest Service has requirements that they have to manage their lands for viable populations of native wildlife species, and federal agencies in general are responsible for protecting the trust responsibilities toward the tribes, which includes healthy wolf populations. So whether that's a possibility of something that may occur is another thing out there. So that's about as much as I have to say about the wolf quota that was established and set by the Natural Resource Board last week. But at this point, I can open it up to questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Adrian. And I see just a couple questions in the chat. One of them was a question about the survey, the population survey you talked about early on. And the question was, what defines the area the survey took place in? They haven't seen any wolf sign just south of Cable, but that survey was statewide or the northern part, or?
Yeah, the survey covered most of northern and central Wisconsin in areas where wolves have been detected over recent years. The survey establishes a grid pattern across the state, and with occupancy modeling, then there's estimations made on whether individual grids within that pattern are occupied, and then based on average pack size that are obtained from snow track surveys and average areas of pack territories that are obtained from radio telemetry, the state is then subdivided and how many packs would occur within that occupied landscape.
Thank you. There was another question about a person concerned with the influx of people from cities to the Northwoods, and what the impact is that they have on the wolf population, or even public sentiment about wolves. Is the lack of familiarity of city people making them more scared of wolves or worried about them? Or what do you see? I think there was even a survey done of public sentiment, wasn't there? So
Yeah, there was. Yeah. As far as city people having damaging effect on wolf populations, well, I think anytime we encroach on wild lands and reduce the area of wild lands, it has potential of reducing suitable areas for wolves. And wolves don't do well usually on developed landscapes, and they, for the most part, do avoid people. So the more people on the landscape, the more restricted the areas that wolves were readily able to roam and occupy. So there's a bit of a subtle impact there. As far as attitudes, often people from urban areas tend to have more positive images of wolves because they've not had any negative experience with them, depending, I guess, what their backgrounds but if they've watched a lot of wildlife movies on television, they might be very favorable toward wolves. And that's often the case. I think probably city people who have been raised in cities may have a more romantic notion sometimes about wolves, and that's probably not good either, to have too romantic a notion of wolves.
Yeah, thanks. Can you talk a little bit about the relationship between deer and wolves and how much wolves are able to help keep deer populations in check?
Well, our estimates are in Wisconsin that wolves are maybe killing and consuming about 20 deer per wolf per year. Across wolf territories, a 50 square mile area with 4 wolves in it, they're going to be consuming about 80 deer. That would mean maybe about a couple of deer per square mile. It's probably not going to be a drastic reduction of the deer population. It probably is more of an effect of redistribution of deer on the landscape, so that there's deer probably spending less time in the middle of wolf pack areas and more time in the edge of wolf pack areas. And so what we see is in the middle of wolf pack areas, there's a greater diversity of forbs and wildflowers, and there's less browsing on woody plants, whereas on the edge, there tends to be more of that. But they probably, within the interior of their territories, there's somewhat of a reduction of deer population, but we don't see drastic reductions across wolf range. Their impacts seem to be more on probably reducing spread of disease within the deer herd, reducing it by a smaller amount, spreading them out on the landscape more. I see them kind of as the shepherds of the deer herd.
Sure. Yeah, and hunters actually kill far more deer, isn't it? Like 10 times more deer than wolves do?
Right. So if you take 1,000 wolves in Wisconsin, killing about 20 deer per wolf, it's about 20,000 deer per year. I think vehicles kill between 30 to 40,000 deer per year. Hunting seasons, typically they're over 300,000 for Wisconsin, as high as 600,000 some years. So yes, a lot more. And even bears, we've got about 24,000 bears in Wisconsin. The average bear kills about 1.5 fawns per bear. So that's about 40 fawns that are killed by bears. Coyotes on the average kill about three fawns per coyote. We've got like probably over 50,000 coyotes. So that could be 150,000 fawns killed by coyotes every year. So compared to other mortality factors, wolves are quite a bit less of an impact than many other mortality factors.
Yeah, thanks. I have another question here about what other considerations are in the quota calculation. Do they take into account the number of deer, the number of livestock kills, things like that?
Well, the quota the department presented mainly just looked at what level of a harvest of a population of 850, 900 wolves would keep a population at about that level. So that's what 130 there represented. It isn't really looking at what the impacts are on the deer herd or how much reduction it is for wolves to allow the deer herd to increase. The 300 that was recommended by several groups probably was intended to reduce the wolf population to reduce perceived impacts on the deer herd. And also 300 there was this attitude by many groups that 350 ought to be the management goal for Wisconsin. We ought to push the population down to that level. And I think that's what 300 represents to a lot of people.
All right, thank you. And another question, could you provide the legislative language that requires the National Forest Service, NFS, to manage native populations?
I'm not sure about statutory language. I remember in a Forest Service management plan years ago. I don't know. It's not statutory language, but it's part of a management plan.
All right, thank you. What opportunity do we have to influence or impact the Natural Resources Board regarding changing the quota?
I wish I could say write them and call them. 1,000 people apparently wrote comments for this Natural Resource Board meeting. At least 45 people commented. And I know at least 4 members of the Natural Resource Board never paid any attention to most of those people. So I think maybe contact legislators, contact the state senate, encourage them to approve of Sandy Noss, confirm her appointment. And encourage the governor's office to push to get Sandy Noss appointed. I think those are maybe some of the moves we want to make.
Okay. And do you know anything more? You had mentioned one of the board members who voted then being confused and saying that she wasn't voting for the 300 quota. Do you know more of that story?
Well, I think she was a new board member, and I think there was a kind of speed at which first there was a vote on just a quota alone, and she voted against it. And right after there was a vote on a procedural vote requesting whether any changes in the quota had to come back to the Natural Resource Board. And she voted with the majority on that, but she didn't really vote for the 300 management goal, just that if a new quota was prepared by the DNR, it would have to come back to the board. That was what I heard her vote on.
Okay, thank you. Are there any procedural changes that they have put in place to prevent another over harvest, even with the 300 quota? You know, last time they went really fast. How can they change that?
Yeah, so the meeting on the 11th was mostly just about the quota. There will be a meeting next month on several regulatory processes, including that elimination of night hunting and shortening the period for registering. I think it's going to be down to 12 hours, that the existing period of registration was 24 hours that you had to register your wolf. So those are 2 of the elements. The other is that the number of permits issued per quota harvest has not been reported yet, but I think the department is intending to keep that 10 or less. In the last quota, it was raised to 20 per quota harvest. So that will probably also be one of the things that the department will be doing.
And are they adding or changing any of the restrictions on hunting with dogs?
Not at this time, and the department has very limited authority to change that. But one difference that will occur is because the hunt and trapping season will start on November 6th. Use of hounds is not authorized until the end of the firearm deer season, so that's the end of November. And in 2013, 2014, when a combination of hunting and trapping were allowed then it started in mid-October, but those seasons were fairly quick in filling the quotas. And within a week or 2, some of the zones were closed to hunting because the quotas are filled. So depending on, I guess, what the final number is in the quota, but I would think with 130, it would fill fairly quickly. With 300, it might last quite a bit longer.
Okay. Can you talk about the domino effect of depredation from the February hunt? This is the highest level of livestock depredation they've seen, and I wonder if it's from packs who were displaced or suffering.
I guess I don't think that the effect of the hunt was one that would cause wolves to become depredators. What I think happened is most wolves were removed from core wild wolf areas. Where depredations occur tend to be in more marginal areas, and especially like along the Lake Superior lowlands from Ashland to Superior is kind of the one of our highest concentrated areas of wolf depredations. There were almost no wolves harvested from those regions. They're more harvested from the middle of the national forest in the middle of ideal wolf habitat where there are no livestock. So I think the high depredations are resulting, and I'm not sure they're higher yet. I think they're at par similar to what they were last year, but I think they're of a high enough level because the nature of this winter hunt had almost no impact on wolf packs near farm sites. With livestock depredations, typically it's the adult animals, the alpha male, alpha female, that kind of direct where the pack hunts and the animals they hunt. Those wolves, young wolves that are raised in packs that are feeding on livestock do learn that livestock is a potential food source, and they may return to livestock if their parents are removed. But just random wolves on the landscape, if you think about it, 150-pound calf with a 1,000-pound cow defending it is still a formidable prey item. The easiness of livestock is more in the fact that they're fenced and they're in a very predictable location. But wolves still have to know how to kill deer-sized animals in order to be able to kill them. So wolves that have not experienced killing adult-sized, deer-sized animals would not likely just suddenly turn to calves unless it happened to be just a very, very young newborn calf.
All right, thank you. You mentioned that the reporting time has gone down from 24 hours to 12. Can you talk a little bit more about the reporting system for when a hunter fulfills their permit?
So that's being proposed, and that's going to be voted on next month. Okay. The way it works is a hunter either can call in on an 800 number to the Department of Natural Resources, or by their computer can register their hunt. And I think they're asked such questions as the time of when they hunted, when they killed their wolf, the method, whether they trapped or hunted it, if they used dogs, if it's later in the season, and the county that they hunted their wolf in and the zone they're in. And that, I think that's pretty much the extent of and their name or whatever of the information they give. And then sometime afterwards, they have to present the carcass of the wolf to a department employee to verify the animal and everything, and allow a department person to look at it and determine the age and the sex. They report the sex, but sometimes people do mistake those things.
Yes, thanks. And has there been any modeling done for the future impact of reduction of mating females or males from this last hunt?
There really wasn't. That was one of the things that was kind of absent from the quota consideration. It was discussed, and it was the reason the department felt that their 130 quota was conservative and wanted to keep it conservative because they had concerns about that. But no modeling done within the department. I know that Dr. Travis, I think, in Madison did do some kind of modeling. I'm not sure whether he incorporated that lack of reproduction in his modeling work. The back of the envelope calculations I had done, suggesting that maybe that somewhere between 24 to 40% of packs, less packs produced pups this last winter or the last spring than in a typical year. Overall, that could be, and even in a normal year, only 80% of packs produce pups, and only 70% have pups surviving to the end of winter. So if you take another 24 to 40%, you're down to about 40% of packs producing pups. And the howl surveys that we've started doing kind of suggest we might be in that sort of a general area, and that may be the major effort to learn about what the impact of this harvest will be, is the howl surveys currently being done by volunteers as citizen scientists through the Timberwolf Alliance and the Timberwolf Information Network.
And so if somebody wants to get involved with those howl surveys, would they go to the Timberwolf Alliance website?
Yep.
Awesome. Is there a set ratio of in-state versus out-of-state wolf harvest licenses? And do you know the distribution of those from the last wolf harvest?
I'm not sure if it's a set rate but I know there are some out-of-state hunters and trappers. They do, it's charged quite a bit higher for out-of-state folks. And I think they have to pay a higher amount for the application process. And the percentages, I believe, less than 10% are typically our out-of-state hunters and trappers.
Thanks. I just put the link for the Timber Wolf Alliance in the chat if anybody wants to visit their website.
Otherwise, contact me too if people are interested in learning to become wolf howlers.
Okay. I'll put your email address in the chat then too.
Sure.
Okay. Is the DNR required to send changes back to the Natural Resources Board, and does the Natural Resources Board have to approve permits?
I'm not absolutely sure. One of the things about this last meeting was it got very contentious, and the secretary got into some major scuffles with some of the Natural Resource Board members and telling them they're totally out of line. Much more animated than I've ever seen the department secretary before. So yeah, this meeting may sort of test to what extent the Natural Resource Board has full authority over the Department of Natural Resources. And just kind of backing up a little bit, so the Department of Natural Resources is part of the executive branch, so under the governor's authority. The Natural Resource Board members are selected by the governor, but they're confirmed by the Natural Resource Board. But in a sense, it's kind of like part of the governor's advisory committees, their cabinet. So it's like a minor cabinet to the governor, and the governor selects those members. So if the members are not following the wishes of the governor and not performing or not using sound science and using inappropriate processes, I don't know what authority a governor has for removing or having the Attorney General remove members from the Natural Resource Board, or disregarding the opinions of the Natural Resource Board and having the governor determine what the direction the board what the department will follow. So we're getting in some grounds that I've not seen before as to the level of authority for the Natural Resource Board versus the department versus the governor and how those interact.
Yeah, it seems like it could be a sticky situation, and it could set bad precedents too if the governor tries to overrule them. So
yeah.
Is there any hope that we can get emergency endangered species listing through the Department of the Interior? Is there any petition or call to action folks can contribute to?
I think there have been a couple of lawsuits filed to try to get wolves back on the endangered species list. When those have occurred in the past, that process normally takes about 1.5 years. I think those were filed right after wolves were listed in January. So that means we'll probably be looking at next summer, 2022, before they're finalized, unless for some reason the administration decides to expedite the process. If the administration decides they don't want to keep wolves delisted, there's probably possibilities the administration could do it much more quickly. But through the normal lawsuit process, it's about 1.5 years process.
All right. Why is Wisconsin the only state that allows hounding of wolves? Has there been any advocacy around stopping hounding in general?
There's been lots of advocacy. That was in the court the first year that wolves were hunted in 2012. There were groups that had filed lawsuit against the DNR for using hounds, but the judge in the case decided that the law that was on the books that was written by the legislature and approved by the governor allowed hunting with hounds to occur, and the judge did not overturn that. Why we're allowing it, it's basically just because the legislature that wrote it into the 2012 wolf hunting regulations, and uh, and based on the stakeholder groups that they were supporting.
Is there any recognition by the Natural Resources Board of the role of wolves to control chronic wasting disease in the state?
I think they've been told that, and it's been, but I think it mostly been dismissed by the current members of the Natural Resource Board, or at least members that have been voting for the high quotas.
Do you want to just talk a little bit more about the research that has found that wolves have a role in chronic wasting disease management?
Sure. Well, so there's kind of three lines of evidence. There's some modeling work that was done some years ago that shows that wolves can have potential for reducing the spread or even establishment of chronic wasting disease within areas occupied by wolf packs. More recently, research in the Yellowstone area, researcher looked more intensely at that and found additional evidence, but again, through a modeling effort, not through actual measurement of animals on the landscape. There has been work done with cougars that have shown that they're about 3 to 5 times as likely to select animals that have chronic wasting disease that hunters are. And cougars are ambush hunters, so they're less selective than wolves are that are coursing hunters that run down their prey. And in that process, there's more of a testing process involved there. So they can more readily detect weaknesses and determine which animals they're more likely to be able to take and which ones they're not going to be able to catch. So there's more of a testing process for wolves. And the third line of evidence is just where wolf packs are distributed and where chronic wasting disease is distributed. And so far in Wisconsin and most places where there are healthy populations of wolf packs, we don't see chronic wasting disease readily spreading into those areas.
Great, thank you. Is there a reason that hunters killed the most wolves in core areas? You mentioned that in the question about depredation, and is that due to bear hounding?
Yeah, I think to a large extent, I think the groups that are hunting wolves are the same groups that hunt bears, and most bear hunters have kind of their favorite areas that they normally hunt in, and they spend July and August training their hounds there. They spend September hunting bears there, and then in the fall they hunt coyotes, and in wintertime coyotes and bobcats there. So these are the areas they're familiar with. These are areas that packs that they probably know fairly well. They've encountered their tracks and sign on a regular basis. So they're probably fairly knowledgeable of those packs. And so I think hunters mostly went to packs that they were most familiar with.
Thanks. What can we do to help the tribal governments protect their treaty rights and the wolves?
I'm not sure if there's any kind of funding area that's available, but I think write letters of encouragement, letters of support for the tribes. And if there's any kind of a lawsuit process, or if there's a request for a certain portion of the harvest, writing letters to the department, to Natural Resource Board, to legislators, encouraging them to allow the tribes to have a portion of the harvest.
Okay. Any comments on the confidence in the actual wolf population estimates, given how fast the 200 plus wolves were harvested this past February? He's curious if this rapid harvest might suggest the DNR or other population estimates might be quite a bit lower than actual. Maybe the actual numbers are higher.
So the actual population estimation the department made was before the harvest, and only the department is subtracting the harvest from their actual population estimation. But yeah, to me, there are 3 levels of uncertainty here. There's the level of uncertainty from any kind of a wildlife survey by itself. And in this year, because of the harvest, the winter survey was shortened. Typically, those winter surveys run into middle of March. This year it was ended just with the start of the wolf hunting season. So you have a shortened period of conducting surveys. Then the amount of animals removed from the population, 2018 was a register harvest, but the speed at which this harvest occurred, encouragement by some groups to encourage hunters to wait till the very last minute to register their wolves. I'm sure there were some that probably never got registered, and there are probably wolves that got shot that were never fully recovered in the field. wounding loss is common in all kinds of hunting seasons. And the way this hunt occurred, I think it was likely that wounding loss could have been fairly high. So there's uncertainty in number of animals removed this winter. And then there's uncertainty in the impacts to the population, removing pregnant females, removing breeding males. We know that breeding males that hold packs together and feed breeding females, a breeding female without her mate is going to have a very difficult time raising pups. She'll have to go out and hunt her own, which exposes the pups to possible predators. And she's not going to be giving them milk on it as regular basis. So they're going to more of a risk of starving to death. So that drastically reduces the survival rates of pups. So yeah, so we got these high levels of uncertainty. And with that, our estimations of the wolf population are going to be very difficult at this point. And unfortunately, because of that, there are groups that are throwing in any number they want to make their point. And that's one of the problems when you have such high levels of uncertainty. It kind of leaves a void for others to just throw other numbers out there. And it's a sort of a situation where the department really ought to, if they had the authority, not hold a wolf hunting season this fall. I remember in 1985, there was a risk the bear hunting season was going to result in a bear population falling below 5,000 bears. We currently have 24,000 bears, but in 1985, there was a concern it was going to fall below 5,000 bears. And the department was fearful it didn't have adequate control and managing the harvest. And so the department just closed the bear hunting season. To me, it's sort of a situation we ought to be doing that here as well. Minnesota decided not to hold a wolf hunting season this fall because they haven't completed their wolf management plan, and the directions for a new wolf hunting season haven't been developed. So they've decided not to hold a wolf hunting season. Michigan is not holding a wolf hunting season this next fall. So the need for us to rush into a wolf hunting season, especially after this aggressive winter hunt, is only because we have the state regulations that requires us to do so.
Mm-hmm. How many more than the 219 taken in February do you think were actually taken? Do you have a guess?
I'm guessing somewhere between 10% to 50%, but you know, I've looked at some scenarios what the impacts would have been from those levels, but yeah, that's about as much as I can say about it without, you know, that's more just guesswork because I don't have anything really solid to base that on.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, I guess, sort of based on other types of wildlife harvests where there's been intense efforts to try to record wounding loss, and 10% would not be unusual wounding loss for like even a deer hunting season.
Mm-hmm. Well, what do people do with the wolves they kill? Do they sell the fur? Do they eat them?
I don't think anybody eats them. Some trappers may harvest wolves for the fur. Some people harvest them for a taxidermy mount they want to have in their living room or some other room in their house. Some people make rugs out of them. Some are used for clothing items.
Can you elaborate on the possibility of problem wolves being eliminated without an open hunting season? Would that satisfy those that are concerned about pets, farm animals, children, etc.?
I think with the nature of the way the hunting season was run this last winter, there's probably little chance that just bold wolves were removed. But I think in a more normal hunting season where people are hunting over bait or hunting with calls, and the wolves that are least fearful of people are going to be the ones that are most readily removed from the population. The other thing that also will occur in the fall is that any farmer who has who gets paid for his lost livestock because of wolf depredation, or has federal trappers come on their property to remove problem wolves, have to open up their land to wolf hunting and trapping. And so some of those situations, if people come on those lands, they could remove wolves that are more likely to be involved in wolf depredations.
And you also mentioned that if the wolves were relisted as threatened instead of endangered, that the problem wolves could be called?
Yes, if they're listed as threatened, the federal government, USD Wildlife Services, still can trap and euthanize problem wolves. The difference then would be that there wouldn't be, those lands would not be open up to hunters and trappers. And currently too, under delisting, farmers can shoot wolves in the act of and get permits to shoot wolves. As a threatened population, they wouldn't have that authority. So it'd be only federal government trappers that would be able to remove wolves under the threatened authority.
Okay. What are the arguments from the higher harvest advocates? What justification?
I think concerns of impact on the deer herd, there's feelings that the wolf population is growing exponentially and we need to control it. There are concerns that the wolf population goals from the 1999 plan require that we reduce the population to 350. I think those have been some of the arguments I've been hearing. The exponential growth is interesting because between 2017 through about 2020, the population mostly stabilized at about 900 to 1,000 wolves. And the count recently, if you take it down to the minimum counting level, it's still at that same level. So for the last 4 or 5 years, the population has been relatively stable. So without a public hunting season, the population has been stabilizing on its own.
Thanks. If wolves were relisted next summer, but 300 were still killed this fall, do you think they have the resiliency to rebound? If they are not relisted, could the diminished population rebound?
Well, to some extent, even with delisting, if quotas are kept at very low levels, the population can still grow. In 2013, the department had a quota of 250 wolves. And that year, the population went from a minimum count of 809 to 660 the next year, quite a drop from 800 to 660 wolves. So the next year, the department reduced the quota to 150 wolves, and the population grew to 746 wolves. So demonstrating that under normal conditions with normal reproduction, yes, the population can rebound if quotas are kept at low levels.
Okay. And do wolves have more pups as their numbers decline as a way to stabilize their population?
There's some possibility there could be some response to having more pups, but more likely that if all things being equal, more pups survive because there's less wolves in the landscape and less competition for food. Unfortunately, right now, with if you've got females that are trying to raise pups without mates, that's probably not going to be as beneficial. But under normal circumstances, yes, pups can have higher survival rates when there's less competition on the landscape and there's more food available for them.
All right, and just time for maybe a couple more questions. Any idea how much the deer population has changed in the last 10 years in response to the wolf populations?
In general, the deer population, it declined some in 2013, 2014 when we had severe winter, and it's kind of grown above that level. The main factors controlling the deer herd still seem to be the level of the public hunting seasons and level of winter severity. So it's not really changed all that drastically. It's probably a little bit higher than it was in 2013, 2014, just because we've had less severe winters.
Mm-hmm. And what do you know about the actual numbers of various livestock killed by wolves in any given year?
It's ranged from as high as 71 verified cattle killed to last few years, it's been ranging more in the number of 30, 40. I think it was down to 20 some wolves, 20 some cattle at the end of the hunting seasons in 2014. But then when they went back on endangered species list, it kind of went up to 30 some animals. But that's the typical range is about 30, 40 verified. So this is verified numbers, and the department also pays for some missing calves when there's evidence that there might be additional mortalities occurring, and wolves could completely consume carcasses and there's nothing left to be found in the landscape.
Great. Well, it is 8 o'clock and we've had a lot of great questions. Thank you for answering all of them, Adrian. I really appreciate it. So I am going to end our discussion now to respect everybody's time, but please do remember that I recorded this and I'll be posting it on our YouTube page, the museum's YouTube channel. So you can share that with your friends or rewatch it to get more information. Adrian, do you have any final thoughts, anything these questions spurred that you weren't able to share earlier?
Just that if people still have some burning questions that I didn't get a chance to answer, go ahead and email me and I'll try to get to those as quickly as possible. At this point, I guess, like many of you, I'm very discouraged. I was hoping we keep the quota less than 130, and at this point 130 now seems like it would have been a good thing, but hopefully things will change eventually here and we'll start getting back to a more reasonable management of our wolf population, but we're living in some dark times for our current wolf population. I
agree. So if you want some more happy and cute news on wolves, I just put a link to the Voyageurs Wolf Project Facebook page into the chat because they're doing some summer research on wolves with some pretty amazing trail camera footage. And so if you want to see cute wolves in a protected place doing well, that can fuel us for the fight to come. So yeah, anything else?
That should do it. Thank you, Emily.
All right, thanks, Adrian. Thank you all for coming, and I hope to see you tomorrow night as well for our Project Northwoods Joseph Jenkins lecture, and check out the rest of our fall calendar of events. We have a lot of great programs coming up to learn about the Northwoods. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all.